Hey guys! Today we'll be covering a 2016 drama film called Lavender. It is 1985, and inside a farmhouse, bloodied corpses lie on the floor covered only by white sheets. Despite the chaos, everything around them is at a standstill. The police officers who raided the scene remain inactive as the camera moves. The movie then cuts to the image of a young Jane sitting on the floor, her face covered in blood. Police officers tell Patrick, Jane's paternal uncle, that something has happened to his brother and his family. The song Lavender Blue plays in the background. Jane is raised by her foster family and has no memory of her family or the tragedy. 25 years later, Jane still has no memories of what happened in the farmhouse. She is now a photographer obsessed with taking pictures of old houses and the people who once lived in them. Jane owns a studio where she sells the photographs she takes of abandoned houses. She has a strained relationship with her husband Alan and their young daughter Alice, partly because she has memory lapses. Many of their fights are triggered by Jane's tendency to forget appointments and important dates, and she is at times unresponsive to those around her. One day, after taking some photos of abandoned houses in the countryside, Jane and her daughter Alice are driving back home. They stumble upon a farmhouse, and Jane can't seem to ignore its inexplicable pull. She stops the car to take some photos from a cornfield. Meanwhile, Alice strolls around in the field and weirdly starts talking to someone. However, there is no one around. Later that night, Jane hears a knock at the door, but finds no one. She then sees a strange box tied with a red ribbon. When she opens it, she finds a small pin that seems to be a piece of a toy. She then sees a centipede alongside the pin, freaks, and quickly kills it with her boot. In the next scene, Jane is again in a dissociative state, and she stares right through one of her paintings. She is then interrupted by an incoming call from her husband, Alan. It turns out that Jane has once again forgotten to pick up their daughter from school. Realizing this, she quickly takes off in her car. Unfortunately, along the way, Jane is involved in a car accident after attempting to avoid running over a girl who mysteriously appeared in front of her car. She wakes up in the hospital, but doesn't recognize Alan or Alice. A doctor explains to Alan that the crash aggravated a childhood head injury, the reason for Jane's amnesia. He believes that if she spends some time around her familiar surroundings, then her condition will likely improve, and she could get her memories back. Surprisingly, after the brain injury, Jane's recollection process begins, beginning with the remembrance of her maiden name, which she didn't know before. Just then, a psychiatrist named Liam visits Jane in her room and encourages her to delve into her past so that her memory can improve. He examines her condition and says that the brain can be a remarkable thing. It can create false memories to protect us. After the psychiatrist leaves the room, Jane wanders along the hospital corridor. She then sees the same girl she saw right before the accident. Jane anxiously attempts to interact with her, but she quickly snaps back to reality when Alan calls her. He informs Jane that he will be taking Alice home. Later, while driving home, Alice wonders if her mother is going to forget her. She adds that a mysterious girl told her so. Alan assures her that they will get back Jane's memories and live a happy life. Back in the hospital, Jane receives a mysterious gift wrapped in the same kind of red ribbon from earlier. Inside, there is a music box dancer and a photo from 1985 of the farmhouse she recently photographed. Before she opens the gift, she is approached by the psychiatrist Liam. Meanwhile, Alan tucks his daughter Alice into bed. When he decides to sleep as well, he hears the doorbell ring, but nobody is outside. He then notices a package that contains a file. The following morning, Alan shows it to Jane at the hospital. It turns out to be property records. Jane then discovers that the old farmhouse with which she had a particular fascination with was actually her childhood home. Now, her paternal uncle Patrick is taking care of the place. Both Jane and Alan were unaware of this, and the former wonders why her foster parents never told her about it. But Alan thinks it's Jane who forgot about the records, let alone the property she owns. Later, the psychiatrist Liam suggests that she visit the house to try to recover repressed memories. Jane takes Liam's advice and decides to call her Uncle Patrick, asking if she can come by, and the latter gladly welcomes her. On their way to the old farmhouse where the mass murder occurred, Jane once again sees the same mysterious girl, but this time she is walking alongside the footpath. Next, the family arrives at Patrick's farmhouse. He greets Jane and tells her that she is the spitting image of her mother. Jane looks up at her uncle for some hint of what happened to her family. He hands her the key to the creepy old shack and says, "Only you know what really happened in that house." He mentions that her sister and parents were murdered in the house, but nothing more. Being a heavily traumatized person attempting to comprehend her own life, Jane's memories are understandably fuzzy. As she explores her past and former home, there is a series of slow-motion sequences and hallucinatory scenes where reality and fragments of one's imagination are merged. In the following scene, the family arrives at Jane's farmhouse and supernatural things begin to happen. Jane starts to feel strange when she enters the house, so she suggests Alan and Alice make themselves comfortable while she goes out in the field to get some fresh air. Once in the open, Jane sees something moving in the cornfield. She then finds a red balloon floating over the cornfield attached to rusty keys that read, "Welcome home." Meanwhile, back in the house, Alan and Alice are being haunted by slammed doors and a mysterious ball. Despite this, they find the place very normal and simply go to bed. The following day, the family visits a local fair. While her husband and daughter are enjoying the market, Jane finds herself in an antique store. A clerk shows her a framed page of a 1985 newspaper detailing the massacre of her family and the suspicion that Jane was responsible. While she is anxiously reading the newspaper, she gets a call from Liam. The psychiatrist says that she missed her appointment, but she lets him know that she took his advice to visit the farmhouse. Just then, Jane surprisingly sees Liam at the store. Out of curiosity, she asks him where he is, and Liam tells her that he is at the hospital. Realizing that her psychiatrist is lying to her, Jane follows him. Her pursuit leads her to walk and run through a large maze of hay bales. She becomes disoriented and claustrophobic and loses Liam. In the next scene, Jane goes back to her car, only to find yet another mysterious box wrapped with a red ribbon. There is a torn photo inside which features a young Jane, her sister Susie, and a blurry image of their mother, Jennifer. It turns out that the mysterious girl Jane is seeing is actually her dead sister, Susie. Later, Jane wakes up in the middle of the night and sees her daughter Alice standing in her door. She leads her to a room where Jane's mother and a young Jane are kissing goodnight. This turns out to be one of Jane's forgotten memories. Suddenly, she sees Susie again, who says that they need to hide from the monster. Jane follows her, but Susie crawls under the bed. This terrifies Jane, so she tries to suffocate the ghost of Susie. However, in reality, she is suffocating Alice. Thankfully, Jane snaps out of her hallucination, and nothing serious happens. The following day, Alice tells her father that the girl, referring to the ghost of Susie, warned her about the monster in the bedroom, while a nice lady taught her a Lavender song. With all the disturbing things happening around them, Jane insists they leave the farmhouse as soon as possible. Just then, Alice screams that a man was chasing her the night before and begins to have an asthma attack. The parents try to take their daughter to the hospital, but the spirits won't let Jane leave. So, Alan decides to go alone. He eventually finds a truck driving by the highway and takes Alice to the hospital. Meanwhile, Jane finds a music box in Susie's room containing the other half of the torn family photo. The picture reveals that Liam is none other than Jane's father. It turns out that the spirit of Liam is simply trying to guide Jane so that she can remember her forgotten memories. Suddenly, Jane remembers what happened the night her family died. She and her sister hear Patrick enter the house and hide under the bed. But the evil Patrick pulls Susie out and tries to molest her. It turns out that he used to prey on the girls whenever he got the chance. At the same time, their parents, Jennifer and Liam, arrive from work. Liam is very tired, so he falls asleep on the couch. However, when Jennifer goes upstairs, she finds Patrick harassing her daughter. She quickly grabs a hammer to attack him, but right then, Susie suffers an asthma attack. Taking advantage of the distraction, Patrick takes the hammer from Jennifer and kills her with it. Jane, who is still hiding under the bed, sees the horrific condition of her mother and quickly gets out. Patrick then chases Jane, who runs into Liam. They crash down the stairs, killing Liam in the process and causing Jane's head injuries. This is the main reason she lost her childhood memories, thus erasing the gruesome murder. Patrick thinks that Jane also died, so he goes back to check on Susie. However, he finds the poor girl already dead because of her asthma attack. To cover up his murder, he wraps the hammer with a cloth and places it in Liam's hand, making it look like he killed his own family before taking his own life. Patrick then leaves the house, unaware that Jane is still alive. Moments later, Jane wakes up and crawls into a corner after seeing the bloody mess. The police later find her covered in Liam's blood. Ever since the horrific incident, the locals have suspected Jane, as she was the only person alive. In the next scene, an adult Jane sits alone in the farmhouse, finally reconnecting with her past. Liam's spirit also arrives and sits with his daughter, explaining that his family's spirits were trapped and he could only lead her to the truth so she could set them free. Just then, Alan arrives and says he dropped Alice off at Patrick's. Jane immediately realizes that her murderous uncle is a threat to Alice, so the couple rush there as Patrick is preparing to molest the little girl. But since he has a gun, Alan decides to play it cool and distract him. When the perfect opportunity comes, Jane hits him with a shovel from behind and knocks him out. Patrick later wakes up as his niece drags him into Susie's room. As he begs her not to leave him there, she tells him that he can plead his case to the family and leaves. The movie ends as Patrick desperately cries for his life, while the spirits descend on him.